The flames were everywhere, orange tongues licking at the walls, smoke filling my lungs as I crawled across the floor of my burning apartment. I was trapped, dying, and through the haze I saw a figure break through my door. A tall black man in a firefighter's uniform rushed toward me, his face determined. As he lifted me into his arms, our eyes met for just a moment, and he whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson. Remember me?" I did remember him. 37 years ago, I was the nurse who refused to hold him when he was born. I was the woman who turned away from a crying black baby because of the hatred I carried in my heart. And now, here he was, saving my life. How does a story like this even happen? How do we go from such darkness to such light? From prejudice so deep it makes you refuse to comfort a newborn baby, to grace so profound it saves the very person who rejected you. This is not just a story about racism or heroism. This is a story about second chances, about how love can grow in the most impossible places, and about how sometimes the people we hurt the most become the ones who save us. This is the story of how Marcus Williams taught me what it really means to be human. Thank you for clicking on this video and taking the time to hear this story. It's one that changed my life forever, and I hope it touches your heart the way it did mine. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. And in the comments below, let me know where you're watching from today. I love connecting with viewers from all around the world. Now let me take you back to where this all began. In 1987, at St. Mary's Hospital in Birmingham, Alabama. My name is Carol Patterson, and for most of my life I was exactly the kind of person you'd expect from a white woman born in rural Alabama in 1955. I grew up in a household where the N-word was as common as saying good morning, where my daddy taught me that black people were lazy, dangerous, and fundamentally different from us. When I became a nurse in 1978, I carried those beliefs with me like a disease I didn't even know I had. St. Mary's Hospital was where I worked for nearly 4 decades. It was a small community hospital that served both white and black families. But in 1987, the integration was still uneasy. The civil rights movement had legally ended segregation, but hearts and minds change much slower than laws. I was proud of my work as a labor and delivery nurse. I had helped bring hundreds of babies into the world, and I genuinely loved what I did. There's something magical about that first cry, that moment when a new life takes its first breath. I was good at my job, professional, efficient, but there was one thing I couldn't bring myself to do, one line I refused to cross. I wouldn't hold the black baby. It sounds horrible when I say it now, but back then, I told myself it was just a preference. I would assist with the deliveries, I would check their vitals, I would do my medical duties, but when it came to that gentle, comforting embrace that newborns need, I always handed them off to someone else. "Sarah, could you take this one?" I'd say to one of the black nurses. "I need to check on room 3. The other nurses knew, they had to know, but in 1987, in Birmingham, Alabama, it was the kind of thing people noticed but didn't talk about. The black nurses would exchange glances, the white nurses would look uncomfortable, but nobody confronted me. It was just Carol being Carol, they probably thought. Set in her ways. I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone. I was still doing my job, still helping these babies come safely into the world. What did it matter if I didn't hold them? But deep down, I knew it mattered. I knew there was something broken inside me, something cruel and small that made me see an innocent baby and think other instead of precious. March 15th, 1987. It was a Sunday evening, and I was working the night shift. The hospital was quiet, with just 2 mothers in labor. Mrs. Henderson in room 24 was having her 3rd child, and everything was progressing normally. Mrs. Williams in room 26 was a first-time mother, young, scared, and alone. Denise Williams was only 19 years old. She had come in around 6 p.m., already in active labor, with no family or friends to support her. The father wasn't in the picture, she told us. Her own mother had died 2 years earlier, and she had no siblings. She was facing the most important moment of her life completely alone. I remember watching her through the labor, how she tried so hard to be brave. She didn't complain, didn't cry out even when the contractions were clearly overwhelming her. She just gripped the bed rails and breathed through the pain, her young face determined and frightened at the same time. Dr. Morrison was the attending physician that night, a kind man in his 60s who had delivered half the babies in Birmingham. He was gentle with Denise, encouraging her, telling her she was doing great, But I could see in his eyes that he was worried. The baby's heart rate was dropping during contractions, and the labor was taking longer than it should for a first birth. Around 11 p.m., Dr. Morrison made the decision to perform an emergency C-section. "The baby's in distress," he told Denise. "We need to get him out quickly." I prepped the operating room while Dr. Morrison explained the procedure to this scared teenager who was about to become a mother. The surgery went smoothly, and at 11:47 p.m., Marcus Williams entered the world. He was small, just over 5 pounds, but his lungs were strong. His cry filled the operating room. That beautiful sound that never got old, no matter how many times I heard it. Dr. Morrison held him up for Denise to see. "It's a boy," he announced, and I saw tears stream down her face as she looked at her son for the first time. "He's perfect," she whispered. "He's absolutely perfect." But then something went wrong with Denise. She started bleeding heavily, more than normal after a C-section. Dr. Morrison's face went serious as he worked to control the hemorrhaging. "Carol, I need you to take the baby to the nursery," he said urgently. "Get him cleaned up and monitored. I need all hands here." I looked down at this tiny black baby in my arms, and for a moment time seemed to stop. He had stopped crying and was looking up at me with those newborn eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing at the same time. His little hand had worked free from the blanket and was reaching up, his tiny fingers grasping at the air. This was the moment. This was when I should have done what I had done hundreds of times before with white babies. Hold him close, whisper to him that everything was okay, comfort him in those first frightening moments outside the womb. This was when I should have been a nurse first and foremost, when I should have let my humanity override my prejudice. Instead, I called for Sarah Jenkins, one of the black nurses. "Sarah, can you take him? I need to assist Dr. Morrison." It was a lie. Dr. Morrison had plenty of assistants and he hadn't asked me to stay. I just couldn't bring myself to hold this baby, to give him the comfort he needed because of the color of his skin. Sarah looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Not just disappointment or frustration, but genuine sadness. She took Marcus from me without a word and carried him to the nursery, whispering soft words of comfort as she walked away. I stayed in the operating room, but I wasn't really needed there. As I watched Dr. Morrison work to save Denise's life, I realized that I had just failed in the most fundamental way possible. I had let prejudice override compassion. I had looked at an innocent baby and seen not a human being who needed comfort, but a symbol of everything I had been taught to fear and hate. Denise survived the surgery, but she was weak from blood loss and would need several days to recover. Marcus was healthy but small, and would need to stay in the NICU for monitoring. During those first crucial days of his life, when he should have been bonding with his mother, they were separated by medical necessity. I watched Sarah and the other nurses care for Marcus during those first few days. They held him when he cried, fed him when he was hungry, changed his diapers and spoke to him in soft, loving voices. They gave him everything he needed except the one thing I should have given him from the very beginning, the knowledge that all adults would treat him with kindness and care, regardless of who he was or what he looked like. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about that moment more and more. It wasn't guilt exactly, because I had convinced myself that I hadn't really done anything wrong. I had called another nurse to help, which was perfectly normal. I had assisted with the medical emergency, which was my job. I had followed protocol. But something was eating at me. Maybe it was the way Sarah had looked at me, or maybe it was seeing how tenderly the other nurses cared for Marcus during his extended stay in the NICU. Denise had complications from her surgery and couldn't be discharged for over a week, so Marcus spent his first precious days being cared for by the hospital staff. I started paying attention to things I had never noticed before. I watched how the black nurses interacted with all the babies, white and black alike. They showed no preference, no hesitation. When little Emma Johnson, a white baby, was born 2 days after Marcus, I watched Sarah hold her with the same tenderness she had shown Marcus. Love didn't have a color for these women. Care didn't have conditions. I also started noticing my own behavior in a way I never had before. I realized that my preference for not holding black babies wasn't just about comfort, it was about a deep-seated belief that these children were somehow less deserving of affection, less worthy of the tender care I gave freely to white infants. The realization made me physically sick. I began to remember things from my childhood that I had buried or rationalized away. I remembered my father crossing the street to avoid walking past black families. I remembered my mother warning me not to play with the black children at the town playground. I remembered being taught that integration was dangerous, that black people were violent and untrustworthy. But here I was, working alongside black nurses who were more compassionate and professional than many of my white colleagues. Here I was, watching black mothers love their children with the same fierce devotion as any white mother. Here I was, seeing black babies who were just as innocent and beautiful as any white baby. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. I started having dreams about Marcus. In the dreams, I was holding him, comforting him, and he would look up at me with those big, trusting eyes. Then, I would wake up and remember that I had rejected him, that I had chosen prejudice over compassion in his first moments of life. 3 weeks after Marcus was born, Denise was finally strong enough to take him home. I was working the day shift when she came to collect him from the NICU. She looked so young, this teenage mother, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Motherhood had changed her, given her purpose and determination. I watched from the nurse's station as she held her son for the first time since his birth. The love on her face was radiant, transformative. This was her baby, her heart walking around outside her body, and she was going to protect him and love him with everything she had. As she prepared to leave, Denise stopped at the nurse's station to thank the staff. She spoke to each nurse individually, expressing her gratitude for the care they had provided. When she got to me, she paused. "Thank you for helping to bring Marcus into the world," she said simply. "He's going to do great things someday. I just know it." I managed to say, "You're welcome," but the words felt hollow. I hadn't really helped bring Marcus into the world. I had helped bring him into the world and then immediately rejected him. I had been present for his birth, but absent for his humanity. After Denise left with Marcus, I found myself alone in the break room, crying for reasons I couldn't fully understand. Sarah Jenkins found me there 20 minutes later, tears streaming down my face. "You okay, Carol?" she asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice, despite everything. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think I might have done something terrible, and I don't know how to fix it." Sarah sat down across from me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she said something that changed everything. "It's never too late to do better. That little boy is going to face enough challenges in this world without carrying the weight of how one nurse treated him on his first day. But you know what? He's also going to experience more love and kindness than you can imagine, because that's what most people are really like when you give them a chance." "How do you do it?" I asked her. "How do you not hate people like me?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Hate is exhausting, Carol, and it doesn't change anything. But understanding, forgiveness, growth, that can change everything. The question isn't whether I hate you. The question is whether you're ready to hate yourself a little less and start doing the work to become who you're supposed to be." Sarah's words haunted me for months. I tried to go back to my normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every time I helped deliver a baby, I was hyper aware of my reactions, my instincts, my internal responses. I realized that my prejudice wasn't just about holding babies. It infected every interaction I had with black families. I started paying attention to the subtle ways I treated black mothers differently, how I was more clinical with them, less warm, how I assumed they wouldn't understand medical terminology as well, how I was quicker to judge their parenting choices or their family situations. The awareness was devastating. 6 months after Marcus was born, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I signed up for a workshop on cultural sensitivity and bias in healthcare. It was held at the community college on Saturday mornings, and I was the only white nurse from St. Mary's who attended. The workshop was led by Dr. Amelia Roberts, a black psychologist who specialized in racial healing and reconciliation. She was warm but direct, and she didn't let anyone hide behind euphemisms or politeness when discussing racism. "Prejudice isn't just about burning crosses or using slurs," she said during the first session. "It's about the thousand small ways we treat people as other, the thousand small moments when we choose fear over humanity." I sat in that room with 12 other healthcare workers, mostly black and Hispanic, and listened to stories that broke my heart. A black father who was questioned by security when he tried to visit his newborn in the NICU. A Hispanic mother who was told she was too emotional when she cried during her child's surgery. A black nurse who was asked by a white patient if she was qualified to start an IV. When it was my turn to speak, I told them about Marcus. I told them about refusing to hold a newborn baby because of the color of his skin. I told them about the shame that had been eating at me for months. and about my fear that I was too set in my ways to ever really change. The room was quiet when I finished. Then Dr. Roberts asked me a question that cut straight to my heart. What do you think that baby felt in that moment? What do you think he experienced when the person who was supposed to comfort him turned away? I couldn't answer. I couldn't speak at all. The image of Marcus reaching up with his tiny hand, needing comfort and reassurance, and me turning away, it was unbearable. Babies know, said Maria, one of the other participants. They know when they're loved and when they're rejected. It's not conscious, but they feel it in their bodies, in their nervous systems. That's how trauma starts, with those early experiences of acceptance or rejection. The idea that I might have traumatized Marcus in his first moments of life was devastating. I left that workshop feeling worse than when I had arrived, but Dr. Roberts stopped me at the door. Carol, she said, awareness is painful, but it's the first step toward healing. You can't undo what happened, but you can choose who you become from this moment forward. The question is, what are you going to do with this pain? I drove home that day thinking about Dr. Roberts' question. What was I going to do with this pain? How could I transform my shame into something useful, something healing? The answer came to me gradually over the following weeks. I needed to confront the source of my prejudice, the deep-rooted beliefs that had shaped my worldview for over 30 years. I needed to understand where my racism came from so I could figure out how to root it out. I started by calling my sister Janet, who still lived in our hometown of Millbrook, Alabama. Janet was 2 years younger than me, and we had grown up in the same household with the same teachings. But somehow, she had turned out differently. Janet, I said when she answered the phone, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you remember how Daddy and Mama talked about black people when we were growing up? There was a long pause. Then Janet said, Carol, honey, why are you asking me this? I told her about Marcus, about the workshop, about the shame and confusion I was feeling. Janet listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. I remember, she said finally. I remember all of it. The things they said, the way they acted, the fear and hatred they passed down to us like it was some kind of inheritance. But Carol, I also remember making a decision when I was about 16 that I wasn't going to carry that poison forward. I looked around at the black families in our town, and I couldn't reconcile what I was being taught with what I was seeing. They were just people, Carol, just people trying to love their families and live their lives. Why didn't I see that? I asked her. Why did it stick to me when it didn't stick to you? I don't know, Janet said. Maybe because you were older when the civil rights stuff was happening, and you heard more of the angry talk. Maybe because you went straight from our house to nursing school to marriage, and you never had a chance to question what you'd been taught. Or maybe it's just easier to hold on to hate than to let go of it, because letting go means admitting you were wrong about something fundamental. That conversation with Janet opened a floodgate. I started calling other family members, old friends, anyone who had known me growing up. I wanted to understand how I had become the person who could look at a newborn baby and see an enemy instead of an innocent child. My Aunt Ruth, my father's sister, was brutally honest. Your daddy was eaten up with bitterness, she told me. He lost his job at the mill when they integrated. Not because of integration, but because he couldn't work alongside black men without causing problems. He blamed them for his failures instead of looking at his own behavior. And your mama, bless her heart, she was just scared of everything and everybody who wasn't exactly like her. But they weren't bad people, I protested. They loved me and Janet. They worked hard, they went to church, they helped their neighbors. Honey, Aunt Ruth said gently, good people can do terrible things when they're scared or ignorant. Your parents weren't monsters, but they were carrying around generations of hatred and fear, and they passed it on to you without even thinking about it. The question isn't whether they were good or bad people. The question is whether you're going to keep carrying that burden or set it down. The real breakthrough came 8 months after Marcus was born, when I encountered Denise Williams again in the most unexpected place, my own doctor's office. I was there for a routine checkup, when I saw her in the waiting room, holding a baby who had grown into a chubby, happy 8-month-old. She looked up when I walked in, and our eyes met across the room. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Marcus gurgled and reached out his arms, and something inside me just cracked open. Mrs. Patterson, Denise said, standing up. From St. Mary's?
I nodded, not trusting my voice. Marcus was babbling happily, completely unaware of the tension in the room. He was beautiful, bright-eyed, alert, clearly thriving under his mother's love.
"How are you doing?" I managed to ask. "We're doing well," Denise said, bouncing Marcus gently. "He's healthy and growing like a weed. We're here for his 8-month checkup." I wanted to say something meaningful, something that would acknowledge what had happened without making it about me. But before I could find the words, Marcus did something that changed everything. He reached out toward me, his little arms extended, making the universal baby gesture for pick me up. He didn't know who I was or what I had done. He just saw another adult and instinctively trusted that I would be safe, that I would hold him gently if his mother allowed it. Denise noticed his gesture and looked at me with curiosity, not hostility. "He's very social," she said. "He loves meeting new people." "May I?" I asked, hardly believing I was saying the words. Denise handed Marcus to me without hesitation, and suddenly I was holding the baby I had rejected 8 months earlier. He was warm and solid in my arms, looking up at me with those same trusting eyes I remembered from his birth. But now they were alert and focused, taking in my face with obvious interest. "Hello, Marcus," I whispered, and he smiled. A real, genuine baby smile that lit up his entire face. In that moment, sitting in a doctor's waiting room, holding this beautiful child, I finally understood what I had been missing my entire life. This wasn't a black baby or a white baby. This was just a baby. A perfect, innocent human being who deserved love and care from every adult in his world. "He's wonderful," I said to Denise, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "Thank you," she said, and then after a moment's hesitation, she asked, "Can I ask you something, Mrs. Patterson? That night, when Marcus was born, you seemed, I don't know, maybe uncomfortable. Did I do something wrong?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Here was this young mother, wondering if she had somehow been at fault for my behavior, wondering if there was something wrong with her or her baby that had caused a nurse to treat them differently. "Oh, honey," I said, and I started crying right there in the waiting room. "You didn't do anything wrong, nothing at all. The problem was with me, not with you or this beautiful boy." Marcus was still in my arms, and he reached up to touch my face as the tears fell. His little hand was so gentle, so trusting. Here I was, the woman who had rejected him on the day he was born, and he was trying to comfort me in my distress. "I need to tell you something," I said to Denise. "That night when Marcus was born, I should have held him right away, should have comforted him, but I didn't. I let my own prejudices get in the way of doing my job and being human. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Denise was quiet for a long moment, processing what I had said. Then she asked, "Because we're black?" I nodded, unable to speak.
"I thought so," she said softly. "I felt it that night, the way you looked at us. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe you were just having a bad day, or were stressed about the medical emergency."
"No," I said. "You weren't paranoid. You were right. And I am so ashamed of myself." We sat there in silence for a moment, Marcus content in my arms, completely oblivious to the weight of the conversation happening around him.
"Why are you telling me this?"
Denise asked finally. "Because I've been going to counseling, learning about racism and bias, trying to understand where my prejudices came from so I can get rid of them. And because you deserve an apology, you both do. What I did was wrong, and it's been eating at me for months." Denise studied my face for a long moment. Then she said something that showed a wisdom far beyond her 19 years. "Mrs. Patterson, I appreciate your apology. I really do, but what matters now is what you do going forward. Are you going to keep learning? Are you going to treat the next black family better? Are you going to use this shame to become a better person?" "Yes," I said immediately. "Yes, absolutely." "Then we're okay," she said. "Marcus won't remember that first day, but he'll remember how he's treated going forward. And if you're committed to doing better, then that's what matters." Marcus chose that moment to grab my nose and giggle, and despite the heavy conversation, both Denise and I couldn't help but smile. This child, who had every right to mistrust me, was showing me nothing but openness and joy. "He's going to do great things," I said, echoing Denise's words from 8 months earlier. "I know he is," she said with fierce maternal pride. "He's going to change the world." After that encounter with Denise and Marcus, everything changed for me. I threw myself into the work of unlearning racism, with the same dedication I had once brought to my nursing career. I continued attending Doc Roberts' workshops, I read books about racial justice and reconciliation, and I started volunteering at a community health clinic, that served primarily Black and Hispanic families. But the most important change happened at work. I made a conscious decision to confront my biases every single day. When a Black mother came in for delivery, I made sure to offer her the same warmth and support I gave to white mothers. When a Black baby was placed in my arms, I held them with the same tenderness I showed all newborns. It wasn't easy. 40 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. There were moments when I caught myself having racist thoughts, making assumptions, or treating families differently, but instead of ignoring these moments or making excuses, I acknowledged them, examined them, and worked to do better. The other nurses noticed the change in me. Some were supportive, praising my efforts to grow and learn. Others were less understanding, making comments about political correctness, or suggesting that I was overcompensating out of guilt. Sarah Jenkins, who had been so patient with me from the beginning, became something of a mentor. She helped me understand the subtle ways that racism showed up in healthcare, from pain management disparities to assumptions about compliance with medical advice. The thing about racism, Sarah told me one day, is that it's not just about individual attitudes. It's built into systems, into institutions, into the way we've always done things. Changing your heart is important, but you also have to work to change the systems. Inspired by her words, I started paying attention to the broader patterns at St. Mary's. I noticed that Black mothers were more likely to have their pain minimized during labor. I saw that Black families received less detailed explanations of medical procedures. I observed that Black fathers were more likely to be questioned about their presence in the maternity ward. I started speaking up. When I heard a colleague make a racist comment, I challenged it. When I saw a Black family being treated dismissively, I intervened. When hospital policies seemed to disproportionately affect families of color, I raised questions in staff meetings. It wasn't popular. Some of my longtime colleagues accused me of being a troublemaker, or suggested that I had gone too far in my efforts to address racism. But I had learned something important. Being comfortable had never led me anywhere good. Growth required discomfort. The real test came 2 years after Marcus was born, when I was assigned to care for another young Black mother during a difficult labor. Keisha Johnson was 17 years old, alone, and scared. The baby's father had abandoned her when he learned she was pregnant, and her own mother was working 2 jobs and couldn't be there for the birth. As Keisha labored through the night, I found myself thinking about Denise and Marcus, about the opportunity I had missed to show compassion when it was most needed. This time, I was determined to do better. I held Keisha's hand during contractions. I spoke to her gently, encouraging her, telling her she was strong and brave. When she cried from fear and pain, I wiped her tears and promised her that everything would be okay. When her baby boy was born healthy and perfect at 6:23 a.m., I was the first person to hold him after the doctor. "He's beautiful," I told Keisha as I placed her son in her arms. "Absolutely beautiful." Keisha looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for being so kind to us." In that moment, I realized that I had finally become the nurse I was always supposed to be. Not just technically competent, but truly caring. Not just professional, but deeply human. Over the following years, I made it my mission to ensure that every family that came through our maternity ward felt welcomed, respected, and cared for, regardless of their race, background, or circumstances. I became known as the nurse who went above and beyond, who fought for her patients, who treated everyone with dignity and compassion. But I also never forgot about Marcus. I thought about him often, wondering how he was growing up, what kind of man he would become. I followed his progress through Denise, who would sometimes update me when we ran into each other around town. He was smart, she told me, athletic, kind to everyone he met, a natural leader who stood up for kids who were being bullied. He wants to be a firefighter when he grows up, Denise told me when Marcus was 7 years old. He says he wants to help people and save lives. I wasn't surprised. Even as a baby, Marcus had shown signs of the compassion and courage that would define his character. Which brings us back to that night in 2024, 37 years after Marcus Williams was born, the night my apartment building caught fire, the night I thought I was going to die, the night the baby I had once rejected saved my life. As Marcus carried me out of that burning building, I thought about the incredible journey that had brought us to this moment. A journey that started with prejudice and rejection, wound through shame and self-examination, and arrived at grace and redemption. Marcus didn't know who I was when he burst through my door that night. He was just doing his job, following his calling to save lives. But when he whispered, "Hello, Mrs. Patterson, remember me?" as he lifted me in his arms, I knew that this moment was about more than coincidence. This was about the circle of human experience, about how our actions ripple forward through time in ways we can never predict. In the ambulance, as the paramedics checked my vitals and treated me for smoke inhalation, Marcus sat beside me and held my hand. "You're going to be okay, Mrs. Patterson," he said. "You're safe now." "Marcus," I said, my voice hoarse from the smoke, "I need you to know something. I need you to know how sorry I am for how I treated you when you were born." He looked at me with surprise. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," I said, "and I'm so sorry. I was a different person then, a person I'm ashamed of. But you, Marcus, you helped change me. Your mother's grace, your innocence, the way you smiled at me when I held you in that doctor's office. You helped me become who I was supposed to be all along." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he squeezed my hand and said, "Mrs. Patterson, I became a firefighter because I wanted to save people, to help them in their worst moments. But the truth is, I think you might have saved me first. My mama told me about that day in the doctor's office, how you apologized, how you held me and cried. She said it showed me that people can change. That even when someone hurts you, they might not be a bad person, they might just be a confused person who needs to find their way to love. That night when I was born," he continued, "you weren't ready to see me as just a baby who needed comfort. But every other day since then, you've been the nurse who fights for kids like me, who makes sure Black families feel welcome and cared for. My mama hears things. Mrs. Patterson, the community knows what you've become. You've probably held 1,000 Black babies since me, and you've held every one of them with love." As we arrived at the hospital, the same St. Mary's Hospital where Marcus had been born 37 years earlier, I realized that he was right. In trying to make amends for one moment of prejudice, I had lived decades of intentional love. In working to heal the wound I had inflicted on my own soul, I had become someone who could heal others. Marcus helped wheel my stretcher into the emergency room, where several nurses I had worked with for decades were waiting to care for me. As they took over my medical care, Marcus prepared to leave for his next call. "Marcus," I called out as he reached the door. He turned back to me. "Thank you," I said. "Not just for saving my life tonight, but for helping me learn how to live it." He smiled, the same radiant smile I remembered from that 8-month-old baby in the doctor's office. "We saved each other, Mrs. Patterson. That's what people do when they choose love over fear." As I recovered from that fire, I had a lot of time to think about the strange and beautiful way life works. How a moment of prejudice can become a lifetime of growth. How shame can transform into purpose. How the people we hurt can become the people who save us if we're willing to do the hard work of becoming better. I'm 89 years old now, and I've been retired from nursing for several years. But I still volunteer at that same community health clinic, still fight for healthcare equity, still work to ensure that no child ever experiences the rejection that Marcus felt in his first moments of life. Marcus is now a fire chief married to a wonderful woman named Angela, and they have 2 beautiful children of their own. Denise, his mother, became a social worker and has spent her career advocating for young mothers in crisis. She never remarried, but she did exactly what she said she would do. She raised a son who changed the world, one life at a time. The 3 of us have stayed in touch over the years. We get together every March 15th, on Marcus's birthday, to celebrate not just his life, but the journey we've all taken together, from rejection to acceptance, from prejudice to love, from shame to redemption. At our most recent gathering, Marcus's 5-year-old daughter, Sophia, climbed into my lap and asked me to tell her a story. As I looked down at this beautiful mixed-race child, with her father's kind eyes and her mother's gentle smile, I realized that she represents everything I once feared and everything I've learned to celebrate. "What kind of story do you want to hear?" I asked her. "A story about how people can change," she said, with the profound wisdom that sometimes comes from the mouths of children. So I told her this story, the story of how her daddy was born into a world where not everyone was ready to love him, but where love eventually won anyway. The story of how prejudice can be unlearned, how hearts can be opened, how grace can transform even the most broken among us. "Is it a true story?" Sophia asked when I finished. "Every word," I told her. "And did everybody live happily ever after?" I thought about that question for a long moment. Did we live happily ever after? Not exactly. Life isn't a fairy tale. And the work of overcoming racism, both in ourselves and in our society, is never really finished. There are still hospitals where black mothers receive substandard care. There are still medical professionals who carry unconscious biases. There are still systems that need to be changed and hearts that need to be opened. But here's what I told Sophia, and what I want to tell you. We lived better ever after. We learned to love better, to see better, to be better, and that's what real happily ever after looks like. Not perfection, but growth. Not an ending, but a beginning. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to think about your own life, your own prejudices, your own opportunities for growth. We all have Marcus moments, times when we're called to choose between fear and love, between prejudice and compassion, between the easy path of staying the same and the difficult path of becoming better. The question isn't whether you've ever held prejudice in your heart. We all have. The question is what you're going to do about it. Are you going to let it define you, or are you going to let it refine you? Marcus Williams taught me that heroism isn't just about running into burning buildings, though he's done plenty of that. Real heroism is about running toward the hard conversations, the uncomfortable truths, the parts of ourselves that need healing. It's about choosing grace over grudges, growth over comfort, love over fear. I was 62 years old when I held Marcus for the first time in that doctor's office. 62 years old when I finally learned what it meant to see a child, any child, as simply and completely human. If I could change at 62 after 4 decades of nursing and a lifetime of conditioning, then change is possible for anyone at any age. The baby I once rejected grew up to save my life, but the truth is, he had been saving me all along. Every time I chose to hold a black baby with love instead of fear, every time I fought for a family that looked different from me, every time I spoke up against injustice, in all those moments, Marcus was there, teaching me what it means to be human. That's the real miracle of this story. Not that a firefighter saved someone from a fire. That's what firefighters do. The miracle is that love won. The miracle is that prejudice can be overcome. The miracle is that we can choose, again and again, to be better than we were yesterday. So here's my challenge to you. Find your Marcus. Find the person or the situation that calls you to grow beyond your comfort zone, beyond your prejudices, beyond your fears. Find the part of yourself that needs healing, and have the courage to do the work. Because somewhere out there, there's a baby being born who deserves to be held with love by every adult in the world. There's a child who needs to know that they matter, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. There's a family that needs an advocate, a voice, a champion. That could be you. That should be you. After all, we're all just babies in someone's arms, hoping to be held with love. The question is, when it's your turn to do the holding, what will you choose? Choose love. Choose growth. Choose grace. Choose to be the person who holds every baby, every human being, as if they were the most precious thing in the world, because they are.